Hey guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. This is your host Thomas Tyree from On the Hot Podcast. Today, this will be the Combat Series episode number 61 for you guys today. Of course, this episode is going to be coming out on all four of our platforms: our Instagram account, our Facebook account, our YouTube account, and our Apple Podcast account. So let's go ahead and dive into the Combat Series this week. I'll be sharing my UFC 305 main event summary between Israel Adesanya and Dricus Du Plessis. So last night in the main event of UFC 305, we saw Dricus Du Plessis successfully retain his middleweight championship against Israel Adesanya. He picked up the victory by submission in the fourth round to successfully retain that middleweight championship. So this will be my fight summary on last night's fight. Honestly, I thought that Dricus Du Plessis was going to be the better fighter heading into this fight. I knew for a long time, he prepared a long time to fight Israel Adesanya, and it's shown in his game plan last night in the main event of UFC 305. Now, on my unofficial scorecard, I had DDP up 2-1 before the fourth round submission stoppage, but I thought DDP had an excellent game plan. He was blitzing Israel Adesanya well all night long. He was beating Israel Adesanya in his own game and the striking department. As we all know, Israel Adesanya became a household name and one of the best strikers in UFC history by landing significant strikes. Well, DDP beat him to the punch last night. He was the better significant striker, landing the counter shots and landing that signature left hook all night long that was hurting Israel Adesanya for all four rounds throughout the fight. The significant strikes were landing. And I will have to say that DDP did have to overcome some adversity, because when round 4 started, Israel Adesanya had his own wave of momentum going. He built up momentum into the fourth round, but DDP overcame the storm, and he stayed calm, and cool, and collected in the octagon. Because what happened in the fourth round was he started hurting. We saw Israel Adesanya was hurting DDP with some body shots. But then DDP hurt Israel Adesanya in a quick flash with that signature left hook that stunned Israel Adesanya and set up the finishing sequence for DDP to lock in that rear naked choke when he got Israel Adesanya on the mat to quickly make Israel Adesanya submit and DDP is the first man to say that he defeated Israel Adesanya by submission in Israel Adesanya's MMA career. So that's a huge accomplishment for DDP, not only to retain the middleweight championship, but be the first man to say, I submitted one of the greatest middleweight champions of all time, center of the octagon last night in the main event of UFC 305. I'm very happy for DDP, and I know he trained a very long time for Israel Adesanya, and it showed that hard work and preparation paid off, because the game plan was absolutely good and spectacular in favor of DDP last night in the main event of UFC 305. And I'm looking at this. Israel Adesanya really didn't have a good... don't get me wrong, the game plan was good. I don't know if throughout the build-up, and there was so much animosity between the two African fighters. I don't know if Israel Adesanya let the talk at the final press conference, the words that Dricus Du Plessis said to him, get to him. But I felt like Israel Adesanya didn't really fight the way how he really wanted to. If that makes sense for you guys out there watching. Listen, did he fight way better than his last outing a year ago when he fought Sean Strickland? Yes. But something didn't really click to me. But something that did stand out for Israel Adesanya last night to me was the takedown defense. I thought he did a really good job stuffing a lot of takedown attempts that DDP was trying to land on him. He did a good job defensively stuffing those takedowns, and I applaud Israel Adesanya for doing that, because I thought, like Dricus Du Plessis landed 5 to 6 takedowns against Sean Strickland earlier in the year in January. I thought that was going to be the same story for Israel Adesanya, but overall, I gotta say, until he got caught in the fourth round, he did a pretty solid job for somebody that's not known as a grappler for the ground game for this fight. So I gotta say that's something that he did do good, but overall, it just wasn't enough, and that is the reason why that DDP is still the middleweight champion in the UFC and picked up the biggest win of his career, defeating a 2-time middleweight champion in Israel Adesanya. So I like the game plan that DDP had last night, and that game plan is the reason why he woke up this morning still middleweight champion in the UFC world. So with that being said, what is next for Dricus Du Plessis? Well, I'll tell you guys right off the bat, what's next for him is not a fight between himself and Alex Pereira. We will not see DDP versus Alex Pereira in the near future. We obviously know that Alex Pereira has a light heavyweight title defense by the end of 2024. And I don't see Alex Pereira going back down to the middleweight division. And I don't see DDP moving up to the light heavyweight division anytime soon. So I don't think those two respective fighters will fight each other anytime soon, even though they both have said they want their respective titles. So DDP, I think, will go the route of giving Sean Strickland the rematch that he deserves. Sean Strickland is the #1 contender for the middleweight championship, and he did bounce back after losing the middleweight championship to DDP earlier this year by defeating Paulo Costa. And he's still the rightful #1 contender in this middleweight division. I don't see anybody other than Sean Strickland being next in line for a shot against DDP. So I think we'll see Dricus Du Plessis versus Sean Strickland Part 2 and the beginning part of 2025, maybe January, February. That first fight between the two respective middleweights was pretty good, a solid and entertaining main event to kick off the year. And I think they'll do a pretty good job in their next fight. Maybe the next fight is even better than the first one. So I definitely will be looking forward to seeing how that plays out in the middleweight championship scene and the UFC. But I think that fight is going to be the next money fight in the middleweight division. So then is the realization here. Are we at the end of an era in the UFC? We are at the end of an era in the UFC because we are at the end of the era where we've seen 3 African fighters at the top of the mountain in the MMA world reign supreme in their own respective divisions. I'm talking about Kamaru Usman when he reigned supreme over the welterweight division a few years ago. I'm talking about Israel Adesanya when he reigned supreme as a 2-time middleweight champion in the UFC. I'm talking about Francis Ngannou, who Dana White and the UFC is trying to write off the history books in the heavyweight division, but he was a dominant force in the heavyweight division. Those 3 respective African fighters were at the top of the mountain, on top of the game, and kicking asses and taking names in the UFC. And it's weird not to have those 3 guys, or one of those 3 guys, on top of the mountain in the MMA world right now. So I think it's the end of an era for that time, and it was a special run for those 3 respective fighters and their MMA careers. But I'm not really sure which way Israel Adesanya turns next after this loss. I mean, he's lost back-to-back middleweight championship fights, lost his title last year against Sean Strickland last fall. Then you just got submitted by DDP in the main event of UFC 305. So you're really back to the drawing board. But what else is there really to accomplish at this middleweight division? You're already a 2-time middleweight champion. It'll be tough for Israel Adesanya to climb back up the ranks in the middleweight division. You lost against Sean Strickland. You lost against Dricus Du Plessis. I mean, you defeated Robert Whittaker, but this version of Robert Whittaker, I think, is coming into his own. It could be a legitimate threat in this middleweight division. It could be on the horizon for getting a shot at the winner between DDP and Sean Strickland. So after 2 back-to-back championship losses, I really don't know what Israel Adesanya turns to next. Could he go to light heavyweight? I don't know. It's just right now, this is very hard to see where Israel Adesanya goes. And he said he has no intentions of retiring, but it's like, damn, where does he go? Because the middleweight division, I think he's accomplished everything there is. As I've stated in the past, I think he's the second best middleweight fighter of all time in UFC behind the great Anderson Silva. I just don't know where he goes next. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes. But I definitely think for him being 35 years of age, climbing back up the middleweight division might not be the most interesting move for him. So we'll see. Maybe he stays or goes up to the light heavyweight division. We will see. But that is my fight summary on the main event of UFC 305 between Dricus Du Plessis and Israel Adesanya.